Elementary music teacher friend, you love what you do, but you might feel unappreciated and, in fact, unseen some days. You may even feel like you're on a music teacher island and just want to connect with other music teachers who can relate to both your struggles and wins when it comes to teaching elementary music. I get you and understand completely the feelings you're having. That's why each and every week, the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast will provide you with solo and guest episodes that will help you realize you're not alone in your music teaching journey. Throughout each episode, my goal is for you to be able to walk away with actionable steps and ideas to help you feel like you're ready to take on the new week with whatever challenges may be thrown your way. Hi, I'm your host, Jessica Peresta, and I'm so glad you're here. Whether you're at home, in your car, in the shower, or wherever else you're listening, grab your cup of coffee or whatever other beverage is nearby and listen in to the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast. The Sound Thinking Interactive subscription includes worksheets, assessments, slides, lesson plans, webinars, professional development, and support, all by the team at Sound Thinking Interactive. Click on the link in my bio to sign up. And also, for listeners of this podcast, you can enter coupon code TDM20 to get $20 off the price of your subscription.
I'm Chris Nessie, host of Behind the Mic, Voices of the EPN, a part of the Education Podcast Network. Just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited to be joined by Dr. Philip Tacka. We are going to talk about how to ask questions in the music classroom. And I am so excited about this because honestly, we've never really had a conversation around this on the podcast. And I know you may be wondering, well, what does she mean by this? And what does it mean to ask questions in the music classroom? So we're going to dive into all that further. But first of all, I would love for you, Phil, to introduce yourself to the listeners and let us know about all the work you're doing in music education.
Sure, I'm happy to. Well, I started my career in elementary music education a long time ago. And I loved it. I loved it. I was hired by the Baltimore County school system in Maryland, and I actually replaced my elementary school music teacher. She retired, and I replaced her, and I taught for 9 years in the public school system at the elementary level. And I will tell you, I loved it. And all of us know, a part of the reason I loved it was because I had a phenomenal principal. And all of us know the value of an incredibly supportive and wonderful administrator. He literally greeted each child by name at the front door of the school every day. Mm. He was incredible. And I mean, I don't know if people still do that, but he was amazing. So, and he gave me a huge amount of leeway in what I was doing. Mm-hmm. And so my first training outside of college was in Orff, and I went to the Orff Institute in Austria. So I came back from that summer in Austria as Carl Orff, and I, having very few instruments, I sort of made my way teaching that way. And the next summer, some people might know the name Lois Choksey. And she was one of the earlier Kodály proponents in the United States. Lois was a helping teacher in the Baltimore County school system, and she was furious with me for not doing Kodály work. Mm. So I thought, well, I had such a good time going to Europe. Last summer, I'll go to Hungary and study that. Well, that summer, all the Hungarians came to the United States in a program under the direction of Denise Bacon in Wellesley, Massachusetts. And it was a huge summer course, and it was 4 weeks, and it was 6 days a week. We had solfege twice a day. And I will tell you, I was trained, I was a Peabody prep student, and I was trained in fixed dough, and I had fixed dough all through college. Well, all of a sudden I had to do movable dough, and it was nearly impossible. So I did manage to squeak through the Kodály training, but it provided a path for me that I didn't have before. It gave me a real direction. And I just kept exploring that. And so I went back to the Kodály Institute every summer until I got a certificate. And then I continued teaching. I got a master's degree. I got my doctorate. I went back to, because I took a leave of absence from my school system. And we all know when you take a leave of absence, you must pay it back. So I went back and I taught high school music appreciation, which was really tricky. But I loved doing it. At the same time, I was employed part-time by Georgetown University. I eventually was, I stayed at Georgetown. I was on a tenure track position, and I received tenure and promotion. And after being there for 20 years, I quit because I wasn't teaching music ed majors. And for the next 20 years, I've been at Millersville University of Pennsylvania in the Tell School of Music, working with another of your guests on this podcast, Micheál Houlahan. And together we've done a lot of work in music education, focusing on Kodály studies. And we produced now 11 books with Oxford University Press. And so I think the seminal book was Kodály Today. And so that's what I've been doing. And I teach undergraduates elementary music methods course. And I also teach graduate students in a music methods course at the Hayes Kodály certification program in Texas. Wow. So that's what I've been doing for years and years and years.
That's awesome. I love hearing your story. It just kind of has a lot of twists and turns in it. And it's just amazing how, when listening to you, it kind of sounds like you got into Kodály or decided to kind of explore it because someone approached you and was like, I want you to do this. And you're like, oh, okay. And then look where it's brought you, you know?
Exactly. And that's exactly what it was. Had Lois not said, if anyone knows Lois Choksey, she was a woman who was large in stature, and she was an excellent teacher, and she was sort of a larger than life person. So if Lois told you to do something, you just had to do it, you know? Yeah. And so that's how I got into it, but it was life-changing for me. I'm also going to add something. While I was at Georgetown, my interests in terms of research started to shift. And I met I met a graduate student one of my students at Georgetown, I was teaching beginning theory at Georgetown as well as history. And Javier said to me, you know, you are teaching the exact way that Zoltan, my professor in the psych department, and she was a TA at that point, you're teaching in a way that she's trying to measure. You have to meet her. And I did meet Zoltan. I believe now she's a professor at in Kalamazoo, Michigan. But she's written a book on that's called From Sound to Significance, along with Ram Hare, who's unfortunately passed, and Peter Fordresher, who's at the University of Buffalo. And I got into the psychology of music and started doing work in perception and cognition. So for a while, I worked with the Georgetown Institute of Cognitive and Computational Science. And from there, both Micheál and I actually went to Finland a number of times, and we studied there. And so what happened was our work in education sort of took a shift toward more cognition and perception. And that really forced us to look differently at the whole discipline that we had been teaching. Successfully, we were teaching successfully, but this seemed to provide a new direction for us. And it raised a number of compelling questions for us that we felt like we needed to address and answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which ties directly into my first question for you, which is why do you think asking better questions in the music classroom is so important?
I think it's really important for this reason. When we really think about music as an art form, what we're trying to teach is a sounding phenomenon. And it always, we all have to deal with the fact that music raises a really interesting psychological question for all of us. We have to determine, when is something a piece of music? When it's written down, or is that not a piece of music until it's sounded? Mm. And then we have to deal with the fact that when the piece of music is sounded and we know we've loved it, we only know we've loved it because it's gone. It only remains in our brain. Mm-hmm. We have a memory of it. And that became quite compelling for me, because I can tell you the exact moment when it really hit home. Living in DC, there are a lot of concerts and things that are free. And there was a professor in the computer science department that I would often see at some of these concerts. And I was attending a concert at the Library of Congress, and it was a Juilliard string quartet, and they were performing a series of the late Beethoven string quartets. And I always tried to avoid this professor because he would always ask me questions that I simply could not answer. And so this evening, during intermission, he did find me, and he told me he really liked it. And I said it was stunning. And I can't even remember which of it, maybe it was Opus 131. I can't remember which one we heard. And he said, I really, really liked it. And I said, I did too. And then he said, but I don't know why. Why did I like it? And I said, well, because it was beautifully performed. And he said, I know I liked it, but I can't remember any of it. How do I then know I like it? And I kept thinking, oh, I have to get away from this, because I certainly could not answer those questions.
Yeah, right.
And it drove home the point that we all have to remember. And I think that point is, music is an event entity. It exists in sound. And once the sounding phenomenon is over, it exists only in our heads. So as I thought about how this impacts teaching, there were people who, I can tell you, there was a person who did studies on this. Her name is Rita Iao, and she published a book along with John Sloboda, who was one of the early pioneers in psychology of music, that was called Musical Perceptions. And Rita's study was, she taught at Juilliard, and she asked students at Juilliard, she played Mozart's, the first movement of Mozart's G minor symphony. Ba-da-dum, 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 bum, ba-da-dum, 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 bum. That. And she just asked them to write what you hear. Tell me all about what you hear. Well, she found that everybody heard something different. And I kept thinking, well, of course everyone heard something different. But what was compelling was, if I played that forward and thought about my students, I started thinking, how do I know what they hear? So it led me to, I immediately had to take a course in neurophysiology. And during that course, I held a human brain in my hands. And it drove home the point that we all physiologically have the same mechanism. And I can tell you precisely how sound is transferred to your brain, but once it hits the auditory center of your brain, and it sends out an electrical impulse, I don't know where it's going in your head. I'm not sure where it's going in my head. I just know that it goes someplace different in everybody's head. And that's what makes us, we all have the same thing, but it also, that whole notion is what makes us each beautifully ourselves. You know, we are all really individualistic. So, and then I started to become afraid that I was teaching something that could really not be taught. But as I started really investigating it, and I did this with Micheál too, we had to figure out a way to capture what someone was listening to. So, and we did. And so I think the notion of asking questions about something that you have up on the board that's visual is easy. You can point to something and a student can describe it to you and they're looking at it. But how do they describe sound? And this is really interesting. And so when we really think about it, when students hear something, I'm going to use this example because I'm sure everybody knows it. Rain, rain, go away. First of all, I have to think about what do I want them to hear? And then I have to think about how do I know they heard that? So let's play that forward a little bit and see what happens. Well, the first thing that I thought about was I can't tell what they've heard. And I can understand them if they sing something back to me, and I know that they've sung it and it's been internalized. I had to be sure it was internalized. So that led me to believe that, or to think about the fact that we all know people are either kinesthetic learners, auditory learners, or visual learners. And if you ask most people, they'll say they're visual learners. And that's absolutely true once they hit adolescence. They really need that. But when they're younger, they're really kinesthetic learners. They have to be engaged in movement. Well, for music, that's perfect. When you hear something musical, you move.
Right.
So I thought, okay, so I cannot ask any questions about anything unless I see them sing and move. So the first thing is students must move and students must sing. They must be engaged kinesthetically. So if I want them engaged kinesthetically with Rain, Rain, Go Away, I'm going to ask them to sing and keep a beat. Rain, rain, go away. And I could see them do that. I could draw umbrellas on the board and ask them to sing and point to the umbrellas. Rain, rain, go away, come again some other day. And I noticed when they pointed, it was one thing to point to 4 umbrellas, but it was another skill to point to 8 umbrellas. Then I wanted to know if they could show me the rhythm. So over the umbrellas, I would draw raindrops and see if they could point to the raindrops on top of the umbrellas. Rain, rain, go away, come again some other day. And I immediately noticed students that I had taught in kindergarten had, and I should mention that along with teaching in college and teaching a number of courses in college, I always maintained contact with elementary school students because they were the students that I have great respect for elementary education, a huge amount of respect for elementary education. And I always wanted to maintain that contact. And I always think it's really interesting. So the first thing I noticed was pointing to the rhythm was much more demanding for a first grade student, let alone a kindergarten student, but it was much more demanding. But then I thought, well, how do I figure out what the students are actually hearing? So the only way to do that is to get them to describe what they hear, which means I have to ask them a question. but I cannot say, rain, rain, go away, and expect them to say, oh, I heard that there were 4 beats, and I heard that on the 3rd beat there was more than 1 sound, and there were 2 sounds on beat 3, and there was 1 sound on each of the other beats. Forget it. That's not going to come out of their mouths at all. So then I thought, and I had to get Micheál involved in this because I was getting them to answer questions, but I was doing it through experimenting with the students. I wasn't sure of my pedagogy at that point. But after making way too many videos and analyzing myself teaching, I figured this is what I figured out. The first thing, the most important skill that students have to have is the ability to sing. They have to be able to sing. Then they have to be able to sing and keep the beat. And so I noticed with Rain, Rain, Go Away, I would say, okay, let's play a game. Let's sing the first phrase of Rain, Rain, Go Away and keep the beat. So rain, rain, go away. The first question is really early sandbox. And I would say, how many beats did we tap? And fortunately, they would say 4. And then the next question was, let's sing it again. Here we go. Oh, then I also have to tell you that before you ask any question, you must sing. So I said, let's sing it again. And tap the beat. Rain, rain, go away. So I asked the next question, which beat had the most sounds? And they could not answer that question. And so then I started asking this question. Rain, rain, go away. How many sounds did we sing on beat 1? That was fine. And they would say 1. And then how many sounds did we sing on beat 2? And they would say 1. How many sounds did we sing on beat 3? And they would say 3. Because they're hearing rain, rain, go away.
Oh, yeah.
So I thought, oh my God, the problem is the text.
Mm-hmm.
So I stopped everything and I started again. And on a different day, I went in and I said, let's sing the first phrase of Rain, Rain, Go Away on Lou and keep a beat. Lou, 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 Lou. How many beats did we tap? 4. Let's try it again. Ready, go. Lou, 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 Lou. Which beat has the most sounds? And someone would say B3. I also have to tell you that in terms of asking questions, I'm a really big advocate of this, but people attack me for it, but I don't care. I'm old and I do cold calls. So I would go, Lou, 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 Lou. Jessica, which beat had the most sounds? And so Jessica would say 3. 3 had the most sounds. Let's see it again. Ready, go. Lou, 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 Lou. Jessica, how many sounds did we sing on beat 3? And Jessica would say 2 sounds.
2 sounds. Yeah.
Exactly. And then the next question is, let's see it again. Ready, go. Lou, 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 Lou. Jessica, if we sang 2 sounds on beat 3, how many sounds did we sing on each of the other beats?
1.
Yes. Then they can answer the question. So that was mind-blowing. Every once in a while, in a certain song, the text will help you. But in the majority of cases, the text screws you up when you want to know musically what is happening on specific beats in a song. So in terms of asking questions about what they're performing, you have to remove the text. And they also, before, you can't ask 2 questions in a row. They're babies. they, you know, they're babies. Now, I will tell you that if they're older, they seem to cop on to it's metacognitive. They figure out how you're asking the questions, and you may never alter the way you ask questions because it's helping them think about sound, which is, when you think about it, that's phenomenal, you know? So my students, initially, my students at the university they sort of doubted that this would work. But I went into a second grade classroom cold with my students, and I didn't ask the music teacher's permission. I asked the classroom teacher's permission to do this. And what happened was I did just that with this song, with Rain, Rain, Go Away. And I thought, okay, let's see what happens with the second phrase. And so in this particular class, they understood what I was doing. So I said, let's do this next phrase, ready? And loo, 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 loo. Jessica, how many beats did we tap?
4.
Good. We did tap 4 beats. Let's sing it again. Ready, go. Loo, 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 loo. But Jessica, which beat only had 1 sound?
4, the 4th beat.
4 did have 1 sound. Loo, loo, loo. And so I said, let's do it again. Loo, 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 loo. And all of a sudden, a little boy sitting in the back row jumped out of his chair and screamed, 2, 2. Each of the other beats have 2 sounds. And then he pointed to me and said, I read your mind.
Aww.
Which is brilliant because I'm establishing a pattern of questioning that I want them to pay attention to. And they can, provided I'm consistent with the pattern of questioning. So I thought, this is really astonishing. So then this is what happened. We were observing at a school in England, and it was a good school. It was in Birmingham, England. And I was observing the music teacher, but I was wandering around the building. And I went to a 3rd grade classroom, and I was just standing outside the door while they were doing word problems. Well, I don't know about you, but I can't do word problems. I just could never do it. So, but I'm telling you, Jessica, if you heard what these students were doing, it was staggering. So I listened, and the teacher was asking very precise questions, and the students were all answering, and I was having trouble answering the questions. And this was 3rd grade. I went the next day at the same time, and she was teaching math, and she was doing the same thing. And I walked in, and I said, I have to ask you this. How are they doing this? And she said, well, I'm just following the curriculum. And I went, oh, as if that was an answer that was helping me. I had no idea how they were doing it. I said, you're amazing. You're amazing. And then she said again, I'm just following the curriculum. The next day I went in, and she's doing the same thing. And I went, I said, I know you told me you were following the curriculum, but I can't believe it. You're just amazing at asking them these questions. And she said, it's the curriculum. And then I said, is there a chance that I can see the curriculum? And she said, sure, it's all right here. Every question was scripted.
Wow.
Every single question was scripted, and every possible answer was given with an explanation of how you move from that point if this is happening to the entire class. It was staggering. And so I went back to Micheál and said, you have to listen to this, and this is what we have to do. We have to script everything. If we're going to do this, you have to script how to ask the questions. And so we started to do that with our procedures. And then we also learned that kinesthetic, when the kids are involved kinesthetically, they're looking at something visual and they're tapping it, or they're watching you do a specific motion, and it's usually the beat motion. Oral when I would ask these questions, the trick is not to have anything on the board. And they really are focusing on you. And I'll tell you another trick about the oral questions. The oral questions are difficult to answer. And I think you, in first grade and second grade, when you ask the most difficult question, you have to call on Miss Knows It All. Because you want the kids to hear the correct answer the first time. And when Miss Knows It All answers, I don't say, "Oh, Jessica, you're wonderful. That was excellent." The only thing I do is I repeat the correct answer so everyone else in the class hears the correct answer a second time. So along with the right questions to ask, the acknowledgement of a correct answer is me repeating the correct answer. Or it's like, we did sing two sounds on beat. And that impacts everyone else. And what's fascinating about students when you ask them questions like this and you keep them really organized is I'll go into that class and repeat the same lesson because you have to repeat the oral questioning to collect the whole class together. Students might not, you might have a group of students who might not remember the correct answer to the questions, but they'll certainly remember that Jessica answered on the last day and someone else had to get another turn now.
Yes, absolutely.
You know how they are.
Yes.
So then after they do that, one of the things that Micheál and I do you know what unifix cubes are?
I think so.
Unifix cubes are little math cubes that teachers in kindergarten and first grade use to help students count.
Yeah. Yes,
and they
yes.
interlock. They interlock. Well, apparently that was a trend, I don't know when, but take those, go to your principal and get those blocks and give them to the students. And after you've asked all the questions, the next step would be, show me what that would look like. Well, this is fascinating because sometimes if they get the unifix cubes, they build things with them. But you have to ask them, oh, that's very interesting. Can you point and sing the phrase on Lou for me? And they'll point and sing the phrase. So I try not to copy. This is when you become, you're not a teacher anymore. You're not the music teacher. You're the school psychologist. And you're essentially saying, tell me about that, because it could look perfectly weird. But if the student points to it and sings it correctly, what do you care? They've sung it correctly. This is their representation. There was a researcher at MIT in the 90s, and her name was Jean Bamberger, and she wrote a book called The Mind Behind the Musical Ear. And she was convinced that if students, even really talented students, like the students at MIT, of course, she was convinced that if students did not have the opportunity to visually represent what they heard with their own symbol system, then learning could be compromised. Because when we're teaching music and we're actually showing them the notation, we have to think about it. This is a symbol system. And we have to teach them what those symbols mean. But if they haven't had a chance to create their own type of notation, they're not going to necessarily put together that sound can be represented in some way. So that's a little bit about how I do this. And that's a little bit about how Micheál and I do that. And that's a little bit about why we're so incredibly didactic, and we are. We really do insist that you can do kinesthetic activities in the class, and you should. But when you're really focusing on teaching, you should move from kinesthetic activity to an aural awareness activity, where aural awareness means for the child, describe what you hear. You have to ask the child to describe what you hear, and so you have to lead into that. And visual means you show me what that looks like. So I will tell you, the visual lesson, when they're all either drawing with pencil and paper or on a marker board or on something or with Unifix cubes, the lesson's messy. The teacher is not going to have fabulous control over their classroom, but I will guarantee you that all the students are really paying attention to what they're doing. And it's kind of beautiful, because the students that have it immediately, you can say, go help Philip, he needs help. Go help Micheál, he needs help. Go help. And they do. And we all know that children learn more from each other than they learn from us. So this is our focus on hearing. And to make it easier for teachers to understand how to do this, we've come up with something that we call Sound Thinking Interactive. And it's an online program which will guide the teacher and the students through procedures of exactly how to do this. Here's what else I'm going to tell you. I think all music teachers are inherently creative. They're creative because they got into this because they loved some aspect of performance. We all did. And it became so important to us that we are drawn to this. We have to do this. So Sound Thinking Interactive makes the hard part, that curricular part that really does need to be focused, really easy to do, because you can go through the slides and the avatars will guide you to getting the students to think in this way, so that they can actually access the sounds that they're hearing. So that's what I can tell you. Do you have any?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to ask you some more questions about Sound Thinking Interactive, because I'm really excited to dive deeper into that. I do want to ask you, based upon what you were saying. Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, thank you so much for all that. I learned so much from you just by sitting here listening. So fantastic. And although I know the importance of asking questions to students, I've never thought about it in the way you just explained it. It makes total sense to me. But I want to see, and I hate to ask it this way, but I don't know how else to ask it. As you're working with music ed majors and going into classrooms, where do you kind of see teachers fall short when it comes to asking questions of their students? And you probably touched on that a little bit already, but do you have anything else you can think of to add to that?
I think here's where I think teachers fall short. Teachers fall short when a lot of their teaching becomes really too activity-based and not focused. And when the teacher isn't really focused on something specific, the students lose focus, and the students, and that's when you start to have classroom management problems. And so I think it's really hard to think about maintaining a classroom where you're going to have these perfect little students when we're asking them to sing out, stand and move your arms. We're asking for all of this stuff, so we can't control all of that. And I think some of the best teachers I've ever seen have really almost boisterous classes where the activities and the singing is really joyful. But learning is important, and if we're going to maintain our jobs, we have to show that the students are learning something, and we have to be able to measure learning. And it even affects us, and I know we can all, I'm positive I'm not alone in this. When I taught in the elementary school, the only thing I really disliked about it was that my administrators, all of them, called me a special area. And I was convinced that I'm not special. Reading and math, that's special. But music is what they do. When they're out on the playground, they're singing and they're playing jump rope games. They're all playing, you're special. So I think it's really important to have a portion of the lesson that's very focused so that the kids know that they're learning. They are actually more attentive when they think there's a purpose to what they're doing.
Absolutely.
Or when they see there's a purpose to what they're doing. And when Micheál and I were training the teachers in the Houston school system a number of years ago, I'll call this person Patsy because that's her first name, but I'm not going to mention her last name. We were working on teaching 16th notes, and right at that point, Micheál and I were changing the rhythm syllables for everything. And because we use the Tacka system now, but when we got to Patsy's class, she said they're not going to do it well. Micheál got up and taught them, and within less than 5 minutes, they were absolutely using the Tacka system. And Micheál said, "Your students are so attentive." And she said, "Yeah, they are, but that's because you taught me how to be a better teacher. I know what I'm doing, and they're following." And the principal was in the classroom, and the principal said, "I'm not going to say that she didn't have control of the classroom, but she's a model teacher now, and all kids like her better."
Wow.
And I will also tell you this: there was a teacher when we were training the teachers in the Austin school system. There was I was to go in and do evaluations of people that we had trained, and there was someone who the principal had put on a growth plan. And her teaching, the first year I saw it, she needed to be on a growth plan. She really did. But the second year I went in to see her, I saw an incredible difference. And so I said something as the kids were leaving. There was a little boy who was sharing his book with me. And I said, "You seem to really like music." He said, "Yeah, I like it this year." So I thought, "Oh, that's really interesting."
Yeah.
So I wasn't going to let that one go. And I said, "Oh, were you at a different school last year?" "Nope, I was here." I said, well, then did you have a different teacher last year?" She said, "Nope, it was her." I said, "Well, what's different this year? Why do you like it more this year?" And he looked at me and said, "Because she's having a better time."
Oh.
And I thought, wow, what an interesting response from a little third grader. He recognized that the teacher was having a better time teaching, and it was more enjoyable for him. You know, there's so many incidents like that that are really important and very significant, and in their lives and in our lives, you know, their lives and in our lives.
Yeah. And you were talking about, I just was like, "Oh, yes, please," because you were talking about observing the math teacher who she just kept pointing it back to the curriculum and saying, "It's in the curriculum. It's in the curriculum." And I think that is where, I know for me personally in the elementary music classroom, where we get stuck a lot is you don't know what questions to ask. You don't know how to teach a certain concept. You don't know how to guide your lessons from one thing to another. And so I know you've already touched on this, so now I do want to go deeper into it. Is you mentioned Sound Thinking Interactive, which is such a great program. And how does this help? Does it provide questions like that to just guide teachers and do this, then this, ask this? Is that kind of how? I know that's just a little part of it, but would you just explain it more to the listeners about how it would help them?
Certainly. It guides you through in Kodály Today and in the Oxford books that we published. We have a model of learning. It's called the Houlahan and Tacka model of learning and instruction. And the model is this. First, we kinesthetically engage students to embed a pattern of sound with a pattern of movement. Then we ask students to describe what they hear. So the students, without recourse to a visual, describe literally what they hear. Then we ask the students to create a visual representation of what they've heard. So this is called the cognitive phase, when we're just trying to get the students to think about what they've done. Then the associative phase is first we label the sound. We label the sound either with solfege syllables or with rhythm syllables. And then a next step is we present the notation. You know, this is when we hear one sound on a beat, we call it ta. Ta can be represented by a quarter note. A quarter note has a note head and a stem. And so it guides you through all of that. Then that's the associative phase. So the associative phase has these two little stages. First, you label the sound, and you go through immediately and you sing all their repertoire with rhythm syllables without showing it to them. Because if you're saying, when we have one sound on a beat, we call it ta. When we have two sounds on a beat, we call it tadi. And I will tell you that I've learned over many, many years, it's more important to sing and keep the beat than it is to sing and clap the rhythm. It's so much more important to sing and keep the beat. I can't even tell you. And I will later, but I want to go through this for you. And then after you've done that, we move to the assimilative phase, where they assimilate what they've learned. And we assimilate things three ways. In terms of reading, they read examples. Now they can write examples if you have something for them to write, and they improvise with what they've learned. It becomes part of their basis of knowledge. And we've taken all these skill areas of inner hearing and developing musical memory and all of those, and sort of compacted them into just reading, writing, and improvisation. Of the three, I think the most important for elementary school students is to be able to read a little bit. Even if you want to take something to an ORF instrument, even if they can read the rhythm, that's great. Mm-hmm. And the other aspect, you want them to feel comfortable enough to actually improvise. Or the way we have chosen for a young child to deal with improvisation is to give them a choice of things to do. If they've made a choice, they're improvising. If you just say, okay, do what you'd like, that's weight that they'll just beat on a xylophone, or they'll walk away from it. But if you give them a choice of what to do, they'll apply that. So that's the basis of the curriculum, and applying everything in that same order absolutely does make a difference in student learning. And it gives you, it guides the student, but that also guides the teacher. Mm-hmm. The teacher can state where she is at any moment in her curriculum. She can say, I'm at the oral stage of preparing 4 sounds on a beat. And so that's how it works. In Sound Thinking Interactive, what it has is, we also believe, and we learned this from all of our work with Hungarian teachers, and also, and I learned this at the ORF Institute, if they learn one thing really well, or one song really well, all of a sudden it can be applied to a lot of other things. So we have what we call a focus song, and that's the song that you use to teach. Other songs will relate to it. Rain, rain, go away, come again some other day. Seesaw up and down in the sky and on the ground. Johnny said he had a fit, he can't do arithmetic. I mean, every child's chant is the exact same thing. Oh my God. Mm-hmm. But they are all differently the same, and that's what you want. Differently the same is a beautiful thing for a young child. Mm. It really is a beautiful thing for a young child, because the same melodic motifs will really guide the students to sing well. And I want to say this, because I really feel like I learned this. I really learned everything when I taught elementary school. And one of the things I did in elementary school, I went to my principal, who was so good, and I said, I want to take one class of students and see them every day. I want to spend a year or two teaching them music every day. So we figured out that I could do it, and I took a class of 4th grade students. I taught them in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade. And I had them once a week in first grade, twice a week in second grade, and twice a week in third grade, but I wanted them every day in fourth grade. And I had them every day for 35 minutes. And the thing that I learned was people complain, oh no, my students can't sing in tune no matter what I do. If you saw your kids every day, they would sing in tune.
Mm-hmm.
They would simply sing in tune. They all sing in tune. And I can see it now when I go into schools. I had a kindergarten class that I worked with this year, and their teacher sang with them all the time. They could sing. They all sang beautifully in tune. It was amazing, simply because they exercised their voice.
Yeah.
You do it every day. So there's nothing mystical about teaching a child to sing in tune. If they do it every day, they just will.
Absolutely. Yeah, we don't see students enough in music
No, we
class,
don't.
and it's
No, we
very
don't.
frustrating. I love that you got that opportunity because that is great. I mean, it's something that's really hard for elementary music teachers is you know what you can do with the kids if you saw them more often, and it's just kind of given
Right.
what's handed to you, you know. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I am so excited to share the message about Sound Thinking Interactive, and I've loved how you've explained asking better questions and let everybody know where they can connect with you after this episode and find out more about Sound Thinking Interactive.
Right. Well, I'm always reachable by email. And I really appreciate it when someone asks me a question. And oftentimes, and I do have people that ask questions. And if it's going to take me a long time to answer the question in an email, I'll send my phone number or I'll ask for theirs and I'll call them because, I answer short emails. Like
Mhm.
even my students, I limit the number of sentences they can actually write to me if they want a response, but it's fascinating because we've only learned this by working with teachers. We've only learned these things by working with our colleagues who are teaching students in different areas of the country and in different countries. This is how all of what we've developed was developed. And I think these conversations are vital. They're so important. And they're really interesting. I thank you for allowing me this opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. Well, everybody look in the show notes because I will have links for his email and also to Sound Thinking Interactive. And make sure you check it out, connect with him, ask questions to Phil if you have questions about the program or about anything we talked about in today's episode as well. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I've loved having you.
It was really fun, Jessica. If you can think of another topic, I'd love to come back.
Oh, absolutely. Well, hey there. Thank you so much for listening into the Elementary Music Teacher podcast. There is an exclusive Facebook group just for listeners of this podcast and any elementary music teacher called the Elementary Music Teacher Community Facebook group. Come on over and join us there where we have conversations around the podcast episodes and encourage each other each and every week. And also head to my website, thedomesticmusician.com. I have some free resources there that you can download to help you gain traction in your classroom today, as well as the blog and the membership site and all kinds of other goodies to help you keep going in your music teaching journey. I cannot wait to keep connecting with you and encouraging you and spurring you on in your journey of teaching elementary music. Hang in there, have an amazing week, and I will see you soon.